Okay. Well, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Today is March 10th, 2015. It is 10 a.m. on the dot. And this is the monthly meeting of the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability. I'm Robert Spagnoletti, chair of the board. And with us, virtually, by conference call, is Deborah Lathan. Good morning, Ms. Lathan.
Good morning.
And so that constitutes quorum of the board, since there are three of us, but only two currently seated. We are, again, here today as part of our monthly meeting. Notice of the meeting was posted in accordance with the Open Meetings Act. And this is a different day for us. We're normally on Thursdays, and we're normally at 1 o'clock, but we have moved it for various reasons and gave proper notice. Before we begin, we've already ascertained a quorum. I would ask if there are any changes to the agenda. I don't have any. Ms. Lathan?
No changes.
Okay, and so by consensus, we'll go ahead and adopt the agenda. I'd like to begin, before we go to the report by the Director of Open Government, by acknowledging our new General Counsel, Brian Flowers, who's with us for his first meeting today, just started yesterday. He comes to us with a very distinguished background of service with the district government and elsewhere, and we're very, very lucky to have him. He's going to bring a wealth of experience and insight to our board in our office, and we have some challenging issues ahead, and we know that we'll be able to benefit with his expertise and wisdom.
Morning.
I also want to just say publicly, I've already done this privately, but thank Stacy Patel, our former general counsel, for her service during these past 2 years. She really has helped shepherd the board along and the Office of Government Ethics with her particularly strong investigative skills in our early days, and we wish her well in her new position over at the Office of the DC Auditor. So with that, let's go ahead and begin with Ms. Hughes and the report from the Office of Open Government.
On March 6th, I received a request for advice on whether a commission established as an independent agency within District of Columbia government should be defined as an agency for the purposes of the Open Meetings Act or as a public body. Agencies are exempt from the Open Meetings Act, and independent agencies are exempt from control of the mayor, of course. There is established precedent of other independent agencies adopting policies and procedures to comply with the Open Meetings Act. For example, that would be our own public body, the Public Service Commission and the Zoning Commission, just to name a few. The advisory opinion that I will have to issue must address inconsistencies in the statutory language defining an independent agency in this commission's enabling statute, the Comprehensive Merit Personnel Act, and the Open Meetings Act. So just for purposes of your instruction and informing you, I did include that in the Dropbox briefing materials for the board. I'm purposely not naming this particular commission at this time until such time that I issue that formal advisory opinion. I did, as a cursory matter, because I do want time to delve into this since there are going to be some inconsistencies that will have to be addressed, I've asked that particular public body to go ahead and just proactively assume that it does fall under the Open Meetings Act. It's my sense that the labeling of this particular commission as an independent agency is a labeling in name only, that the actual function of this commission, it functions like a public body. But I did tell them I would like to take some time to address it. Over the last month, I've conducted 2 FOIA trainings. I trained personnel from the Office of Human Rights on February 19th and conducted training with 2 EOM staff members, Rob Hawkins, Deputy General Counsel, and Jim Slattery, a correspondence officer with the Mayor's Correspondence Unit. The Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel has supplied me with the latest list of FOIA officers, and I have arranged the annual training for FOIA officers for May 13th here in the BEGA hearing room.
Oh, terrific.
I've also reserved the large conference room space on the 11th floor in anticipation, and I see some people have already forwarded the meeting invitation to some other staff members, so we may have to move it, but for now, it's planned to be held in this room.
Great.
And thankfully, the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel allowed me to invoke their name and making sure that the FOIA officers did, in fact, attend that mandatory training.
Perfect.
So I'm very appreciative of that. Also, Open Meetings Act trainings of boards and commissions have been set for March 19th and March 26th. Again, my thanks to the Mayor's General Counsel, Betsy Cavendish, and Steve Walker, who is the Director of the Mayor's Office of Talent and Appointments, for helping me to coordinate those trainings. Darrin and I are going to tag team both of those trainings. The bulk of the presentation will be, of course, for Open Meetings Act compliance. And then Darrin has agreed to do the short trainings on ethics. I think many of these public bodies have already been informed or trained in some capacity on ethics. So I do thank the Mayor's Office for working with me to arrange those trainings.
And just based on those comments, it sounds like your relationship with both the Mayor's General Counsel and the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel you have some open lines of communication.
Absolutely. I had a very productive meeting with the Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel a couple of weeks ago, and informed them of like the push and pull with FOIA enforcement and that type of thing. So we're all going to work together just to make sure that things run as smoothly as possible.
Terrific.
They did provide to me a courtesy advance copy of the annual FOIA report. So I don't know if the final report has been issued. But I did appreciate their willingness to allow me input on that report before it was finally submitted to the public.
That's great.
And posted.
That's very good.
The omnibus transparency measure, I'm moving forward with drafting that bill. That bill will be it will be intended to legislate the Open Government Directive, amend FOIA and the Open Meetings Act, and give greater enforcement and oversight ability to the Office of Open Government. I'm working with the Sunlight Foundation, the Open Government Coalition, and Council members McDuffie and Grosso's staff on distinct portions of that measure. Our goal as a group is to have a final version of that bill, a draft, to start shopping around to the council the beginning of June.
Okay.
With the intention of introducing it. Hopefully, Councilmember McDuffie will be able to introduce it if it fits his schedule after the summer recess.
Okay.
For public outreach, I think that the office is doing quite well. Word is about the office is getting out slowly but surely. Last month, I led a session at the Open Data Day at the World Bank on submitting FOIA requests to the district. So I walked the people in that session through using FOIA Express and the portal. And also I had to come up with a FOIA 101 for members of the general public, which I think I'd like to eventually turn into some kind of brochure or so. Next week is Sunshine Week, and I've been invited to the White House to participate in a workshop that will inform the President's third U.S. Open Government National Action Plan.
Oh, terrific.
So it's going to be a collaborative effort between civil servants, such as myself, and federal officials on perhaps working on very distinct issues that face both municipalities and the federal side. That same evening, I will take part in the National Press Club's Freedom of the Press Committee and DC Open Governments Coalition 4th Annual Open Government Summit. More details to follow on exactly what my participation will be, but I'll be there.
Yeah, I received the invitation as well.
Yeah. In April.
Traci, I did have one. Traci, I'm sorry. One question on that. I think I recently read something about an overhaul of the Federal FOIA Act. Have you seen that?
Yeah, that's been presented on both the House and Senate side for well over a year now. It failed in the Senate late last year. I think it was in December, and they're going to be, I think the Senate is reviewing those same measures again. It's been reintroduced. So that's the extent of my awareness of both the House and the Senate bill, but for the most part, the measures are the same as what was introduced last year.
And do they mainly deal with transparency in government?
No, it deals with the complete overhaul of the Freedom of Information Act, actually. So,
okay. So it's a very comprehensive piece of legislation.
Yes. And so I've been in my communications with the Sunlight Foundation, the gentleman who I think his name is Sean Vitka, who works very closely on the federal FOIA legislation. We talked about perhaps including on the local FOIA side some of those same amendments that are being proposed on the federal side, just to kill several birds with one stone, since DC local FOIA will often mirror federal FOIA. So it's actually good timing for our purposes that the bill is still under review on the federal side and up for consideration, because I think it'll be a great opportunity to go ahead and include some of those same changes in this draft omnibus bill.
Okay, great.
In April, I'm going to be a panelist at the second annual Wharton School of Business Innovation Summit to discuss smarter government. So that'll be here in the district. And on the 21st of this month, I will receive the Shirley Chisholm Trailblazer Award from the National Congress of Negro Women.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That award.
Congratulations.
Thank you. That award is given to those whose leadership and tenacity has had an enormous impact on the Washington metropolitan area. I don't know if it's been enormous, but it's been primarily awarded in light of my efforts on open government. So my thanks as well to the board, who have allowed me just to kind of take the reins and run with it. Mayor Bowser is also one of this year's recipients of that award.
Oh, terrific.
So that concludes my update for the Office of Open Government.
Great. Thanks. Any questions, Deborah?
No, no question.
Okay.
I have one. Is that all you've done this month?
Yeah.
Nice work.
Not
All
bad
right.
for a one-person shop, huh?
Yeah. Making me look like I'm standing still here with all the people we have on this side of it. But it has been pretty busy. We've opened 7 investigations. We've only been able to close out 3. We currently are inching up from our normal 13 open investigations to now 19. And
All those snow days, I'm sure that's the reason why.
and actually, it's interesting because it's been really the training component that's been weighing on us heavily. We've all been pitching in to go out and do these command performance trainings for the new mayor's folks. We actually didn't attend any ourselves. We conducted all of them. We did 2 new employee orientations, 4 full trainings for the executive office of the mayor, including 1 more we have scheduled for tomorrow. And then they want to do more in in April. We did 1 full one for the Attorney General and his senior staff, and we did one for the Office of Planning, we did a partial one for the Office of Partnership and Grant Services. They wanted us there because, of course, BEGA now has jurisdiction over the donation statute that was in the last amendment to our Ethics Act, added the donation statute to the Code of Conduct. There were 2 formal written advisory opinion requests since the last meeting. In addition, there's 1 outstanding advisory opinion request. The 2 advisory opinions issued since the last meeting were 1302, which was guidance for a public charter school board member regarding whether a conflict of interest existed and whether recusal was necessary. The advisory opinion dealt with whether a public charter school board member could vote on a matter regarding a public charter school operator that employed his spouse during the 2009-2010 year. Because a financial conflict of interest did not exist, a recusal from the vote was not necessary. The board member otherwise stated that he could be impartial. We also did one in 1299-001 advisory opinion. It was a post-employment guidance for a former employee of the Department of Small and Local Business Development. This advisory opinion dealt with restrictions for a former DSLBD employee who is now a partner in a private business. One of the opinions was redacted. The other was not. We couldn't get the person to agree to redaction, but they've both been posted. Our tracking records show that we issued advice of an informal nature in 57 instances. These included, I'll just give you 3 examples, questions from the District of Columbia public school employee regarding whether they could write a letter of support of a group of students from George Washington University who volunteered in a DCPS classroom. And this sort of followed on our sua sponte opinion on letters of recommendation and what you can do as a public official with regard to people that needed references and so forth. So it was a good way to sort of apply that opinion. We did another one, answered questions about campaigning and fundraising for non-district regulated elections. More than one employee is asked if they can solicit for donations, campaign and fundraise on behalf of a person running for Senate in Florida or running for representative in Maryland. And this is allowed under the Hatch Act, and Mr. Burns was able to take care of those. There's been a sort of a recurring question now that we have an elected attorney general and what responsibilities and restrictions the attorney general has on what he can do with regard to any outside sort of political related activities. And so we've been corresponding with the Attorney General's office, their legal counsel division, on an ongoing basis, sort of getting them up to speed. Of course, the Attorney General is not subject to the Hatch Act, but his staff is. So we're trying to make that clear. We also answered a question about whether employees could buy Powerball tickets together in sort of a pool. The lottery falls into the category of rewards and prizes offered to the public. So it's not a gift. It becomes a personnel matter if it takes up more than a de minimis amount of employees' time, and the creation of the lottery pool and signing of a lottery agreement shouldn't take place while they're on duty. Not trying to be too heavy-handed here, but, work is for work. The workplace is for workplace, but, sometimes when the Powerball gets pretty high, people want to play the game. All right. The best practices report has resulted in legislation, if it can be believed. They've taken our best practices report, they've read it, and they've turned it into legislation. Specifically, we had 6 co-introducers, including new council members, Brianne Nadeau, Charles Allen, and Alicia Silverman. It was also co-introduced by Councilmember Mendelson, and I recall
Councilmember Grasso as well, I believe.
Grasso was on it. And Councilmember Shea, right? It's the Ethics Reform Amendment Act of 2015, and essentially it expands the size of BEGA from 3 to 5 members to make it easier for the board to have a quorum. Not a recurring recommendation, but I think it appeared for the first time this year in our best practices report, but it's something we've grappled with in the past. It also makes it easier for BEGA to prosecute offenders by giving it new concurrent civil and criminal jurisdiction, not criminal jurisdiction for BEGA, but
we could refer it out.
Right, to enforce civil offenses and issue civil penalties, including a 2-year ban on lobbying, while the U.S. Attorney's Office prosecutes the criminal offenses. The bill makes it easier to track lobbying activities by requiring all lobbyists to file regular activity reports, and it prohibits lobbyists who haven't paid fines from continuing to work with the D.C. government until fines are paid. The bill also gives BEGA new authority to review contributions and donations to ANCs. Currently, there is no review process in place regarding aggregate contributions up to $1,000 to ANCs. The bill will subject ANCs to BEGA's jurisdiction regarding contributions or donations of less than $1,000 and for their failure to report contributions or donations of more than $1,000. Other of the provisions of the bill also were picked up from the BPR. It gives BEGA authority to fine people who submit claims intended to slow down investigations and bottleneck the process, an issue we dealt with this summer or otherwise taken in bad faith. And it gives BEGA more flexibility to decide the content of their yearly best practices report and adjust the deadlines that currently fall near federal holidays for the lobbyist activity reporting and filing. It was nice, though, because in a press release, they were very complimentary of the board. They were quoted, the Councilmember Nadeau was quoted as saying, BEGA is the most essential partner we have in rooting out corruption and ensuring the public trust is upheld, and I want to make sure that they have all the tools they need to do that job. So we appreciate.
Yeah, that is terrific, and I know that both Councilmember Nadeau and Councilmember Silverman were both actively working on legislation. I guess got merged along the way.
Right.
And I, given the fact that the best practices report just came out a couple of months ago, the speed with which they're willing to do this is much appreciated. And I think it speaks well of not just the council as a whole and those council members in particular, but also of the Office of Government Ethics and the Office of Open Government and their ability to put together a very persuasive report that we had
And let me add one thing to that too. It was sometimes our training efforts are sometimes looked at as maybe secondary to the other important functions that the office carries out. But each of the bills that the two council members were working on grew from the one-on-one trainings that we did for their staff.
Right.
And so I think it was probably the most useful trainings we've done.
And those personal relationships and the personal contact obviously gives them great confidence that the board and the Office of Government Ethics in particular is there at the front end and not just simply the enforcer at the back end, and that enables much more flexibility and greater working relationships going forward. So I'm very optimistic and take this as a great sign about the council's willingness to support our efforts going forward.
Me too.
Let me interject for the record. The bill now has a number for those who want to track it. It's Bill 21-124, been referred to the Committee on the Judiciary. And on a related note, we've been invited to participate in another work session later this week to talk about another bill.
Okay.
Terrific.
Can we say anything about it, or is it confidential? Okay. We don't want to shine the light on our partners who are still discussing these things, but I've heard about it and it's very encouraging. All right, on to item H, lobbyist and financial disclosure measures. We're still collecting fines from January 2015 late filers. The total fines, the amount that was paid was $470. We still have $130 left unpaid, and there's one appeal that is not yet ripe because they haven't sent it in, but other than that, they're all accounted for. Out of the entire group, we have 216 total lobbyists right now registered. We've collected $44,000 in registration fees. They're still coming in. And of course, because so many are using the electronic payment system, we're able to, we're still culling out from the Office of the Chief Financial Officer our share from when those payments are made into the general fund. It should be a total of $63,000 when all is said and done.
That's great.
Yep. Let's see what else. On the lobbyist financial disclosure front, we're preparing to send caution letters to those registrants who made contributions to the mayor's inaugural committee but failed to disclose the contributions on their January 2015 lobbyist activity reports. This has been a result of doing our auditing functions to look and see who's actually contributed and who reported it. We know who contributed. We looked at who didn't report it on their activity reports. Some of the problem is they claim that they didn't know that they had to, but that's not an excuse. We have one, a waiver request, and it's in your notes. It's the Washington Area New Automobile Dealers Association, or WNADA. They're seeking a waiver of the $40 fine levied against them for late filing of their January 2015 lobbyist activity report. WNADA credits their late filing to the U.S. Postal Service. We filed a written opposition to the waiver and included the information, the Postal Service information about them receiving it, and essentially what they tried to do was they tried to send it registered mail to us, but they sent it out on the day that it was due, so there was no way that it would have gotten to us.
Not just the day that it was due, but it was 4:58 p.m.
Right.
On the day it was due.
It was the day before. They sent it out on the 9th, and it was due on the 12th.
No, well, because it was a Friday to a Monday, right? Yeah.
Friday to Monday.
Right.
And so it didn't make it, and actually got even more delayed. And we've said repeatedly, you bear the risk if you of your delivery system. It's due when it's due. And so we recommend that the board deny the waiver request.
I've reviewed it.
I concur with your decision.
Yeah, as do I. I reviewed the material. I don't think that we can very well set a precedent of waiving fines for people who decide to drop it in the mail hours before it's actually due.
Okay.
I mean, we trust the Postal Service, but only so far.
Yeah, I just want to point out that the board does have a regulation that gives filers the opportunity to file electronically,
Sure.
in person, or by mail. And it's very explicit. It does not follow the mailbox rule, as these people erroneously may have assumed. And I think for folks who want to file by mail, they take the risk, according to the reg, of getting it in before 5 p.m. on the date it's due.
Right.
The rule is explicit.
We have an order. Should we do that before the
Sure. I'll be happy to sign it.
Is this being video recorded or just audio recorded today?
Video. I can see the light on the camera.
That one's on too. See the green light?
Yep.
Yeah.
I thought there's usually a little box that shows us.
It only stays up for like 5 minutes.
Right. And I can tell the camera's on because the red light is above the camera.
It's on.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry. I could have done
What an
that.
operation.
All right. We rely on Ron. All right, financial disclosure matters. We sent out a financial disclosure filing memo to agency heads and agency ethics counselors regarding their filing and submission requirements. We also were able at the mayor's last cabinet meeting to remind all agency heads about their filing requirements. And so unlike in years past where we had trouble getting the notice around to some of the agencies, it was a good opportunity at the mayor's cabinet meeting to have everybody in one room and make sure that they knew that there was an obligation that exists out there and that it needs to be complied with. We're receiving lists of the public financial disclosure filers from the agencies, and we're preparing to contact those agencies that fail to submit the lists of public filers by the due date, which I believe was last Monday. We're still working with DataNet, reviewing the e-filing system. They made some big improvements to it, and we're going to be testing it shortly. The problem, though, is that we had to do some new forms, and so they're now charging us to actually incorporate those new forms into the electronic filing system. You remember last year we got some complaints, including from our own board members, and rightfully so, that that there should be, instead of an actual amount when you're disclosing the amount of financial assets,
Ranges.
we should do a range, because that's the way the federal government does it. And so we incorporated those ranges into this year's forms, and that's what needs to be added to the site. But we should be up and running pretty soon. We're just doing a quick purchase order, and then they should be able to add the new forms to the site.
Okay.
We have 2 FDS trainings scheduled. We're doing it for our ethics counselors. There's not really a lot of interest for line, employees to come in and figure it out. I think it's a much better use of our time to train the trainers. And so if they have questions about the ethics, about the FDS forms, they can go right to the ethics counselors.
Also,
So we'll be doing 2 of those.
with the new DataNet system, what we'll be able to do is put the PowerPoint training in the electronic filing system. So as people are filing, they'll be able to click through and say, well, I'm on part 9. What question is this? What do I do here? And it should direct them directly to that so that it can answer those questions for them.
Okay, good. Very good.
All right. Item I, non-confidential investigations.
You have the orders.
Oh.
For the,
Yeah, Jack, you want to say something about that?
Okay. If the board will recall, there were, I think as of last meeting, 8 or 9 combination of ANCs and employees who had not paid the $300 ministerial fee that was imposed for failure to file their FDS last year. We referred those matters to the Office of the Attorney General, and we have been contacted by their attorney, who has been working to resolve some of them, and with some success. One of these people paid, but there are, I believe, 7 6 ANCs and 1 employee who have yet to pay despite being contacted by OAG. And on OAG's advice, the board has been advised to prepare orders to memorialize the imposition of these fines so that if these people continue to fail to pay them, they can be enforced by OAG in court. So what I've done, and you could either do it now or after the meeting, I've prepared orders for these 7 individuals.
Okay. Great. Now I'll go ahead and sign those.
Okay. All right. Item I, non-confidential investigations. I really don't have any updates for the board this month. We will next month, but right now there are more things going on in the confidential portions. So
Okay.
We'll update you on.
And we're going to we'll move to the comprehensive code before we go to the closed portion of the meeting to discuss the confidential investigations.
Okay.
Or is there anything else on your agenda, Mr. Sobin, before we move to the comprehensive code?
Nope. I think we can move to the comprehensive code.
Ms. Hughes?
There's one thing that I forgot to add. It was just an update on the IT position.
Yes.
So we're in the same predicament as we were the last time. The position was immediately posted. There were no qualified candidates who made the certification list.
salary
and
issue,
with that,
isn't it?
only one person applied. So it has been reposted, and I've not been informed. It should have closed late last week, I think, and I've not been informed if we have any candidates to interview. So once again, it's a salary issue.
Right.
And, it's good that the position is closed only for the purposes of the salary lapse. But that's something that we're going to have to give some careful consideration to, whether or not it's going to be re-advertised in the IT position or something else with additional funding.
Maybe in our upcoming conversations with the various council members who seem to have an interest in making sure that the board has the resources it needs, we can see if we can move this whole issue to a front burner for them. Because obviously the problem here is we just don't have enough money to pay these folks a qualified candidate.
Right.
And I know that you've been considering whether or not even whether, given what's been happening with this position, whether it makes more sense to have a policy person or an attorney instead.
Right.
But you certainly aren't going to be able to get somebody for the amount of money that we have available in that FTE. So I think that all of this needs to be on the table in the next few months as we're building the budget so that we can go ahead and make our pitch.
Well, let me, Traci and I have both asked for an additional employee through the budget enhancement process that the mayor will consider.
Right.
Is there anything pending before the mayor about more money for the existing FTE that you have?
We have not received a response on that enhancement request yet.
And I have to say that, I mean, my understanding is that the executive is dealing with a budget shortfall at the moment, so I'm not optimistic that the solution to this problem is going to be a short-term
I agree.
2015 issue as opposed to we're going to build this into 2016 going forward, even if it means we know that it's coming, we can hire somebody now given the salary that we have that will then carry over to a fully funded year. But I do think that it's going to be Sunshine Week next week. I mean, the mayor seems to be interested in, open government data share issues. There seems to be some interest in that, and the council certainly is interested, on the ethics side at least, has shown a great amount of interest, and maybe we can get some similar interest on the open government side.
Yeah, so my tactic has been just in informing the mayor's office legal counsel about the role of the Office of Open Government.
Right.
Of course, it came up if the office is able to inherit the appeals process and administer the annual report process and the like, that it's going to have to come with an additional body or two. So I don't have any anxiety about that IT position remaining vacant because we're at a point now, particularly with both websites where they're up and running and any minor modifications I can make, and we'll rely on the vendor to make changes.
Right.
I don't anticipate anything significant happening.
Okay.
So I think that it's a good time to at least give it a great deal of thought to change the labeling of that FTE to advertise it as some other position, whether it be an attorney advisor or policy analyst. But if the mayor's office of legal counsel, once they get their grounding and figure out what exactly their role is, maybe they will just want to, happily give up the appeals process. So I'm going to be patient for now, but I just wanted to inform the board that
Okay. Well,
there's no one
we
yet.
should keep an eye on this as we go
I do
forward
have
with
a
the budget
question
process.
here. Is it possible, since we don't have enough money to pay the appropriate salary, is it possible to contract with Octo to get the kind of support you need on a contractual basis?
Well, I would contract with the vendor more so than Octo, because Octo, I'm really talking about just the support for the website maintenance. And then if there are any like server related issues, that kind of thing, we already rely on Octo for their assistance there.
Okay.
But
I mean, can you contract with a third party to provide some of the services that you need, since we don't have the amount of, the appropriate funds for a full-time headcount?
yes, we can contract. We can, of course, revise the purchase order and the maintenance agreement with the existing vendor for both websites. That's
But can you use the money that was earmarked for a headcount for a contract?
You'd have to have it reprogrammed from personal service to non-personal service funds. I mean, it's possible if we wind up with a shortfall in the NPS funds as that salary money lapses. So I guess we should see, we'll just keep an eyeball on it as we move forward. We're halfway through the fiscal year, so.
But
My question was, can you use headcount money that?
Not without reprogram. It has to be reprogrammed first. You can't use it until it's reprogrammed.
Okay.
And reprogramming has to be approved.
And of course, it still leaves that same issue, which is lingering, considering our budget constraints internally. What's going to happen if BEGA is going to make the decision to bring the lobbyist and e-filing registration in-house? Because, DataNet is charging exorbitant fees, in my opinion, just for basic changes to forms, which I do think that we're really going to have to take seriously, bringing it under one roof. But that's a matter that can be put off, I don't think, for much longer, but that really is the consideration and has always been for that IT position.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and so with that, let's go ahead and turn to the Comprehensive Code of Conduct. And Mr. Grimaldi, this is your show.
Okay. The drum roll. As I explained to the board in a couple of cover emails, what I did was work off the September 29, 2014 draft that was circulated to folks within and thank you. Within and outside the office. There have been a dearth of comments. One person in particular provided some very useful comments. But what you have in front of you in terms of what we have to discuss this morning, the red line essentially represents my second swipe at some technical editing, some of the few comments that I've managed to gather from sources within and outside the office. And on the theory that we have to start somewhere, I picked 8 articles. There's no magic to those 8 articles. For the record, the September 29 draft had 19 articles, including definitions. And you may recall that former board member Richards had recommended coming up with a preamble, which is still out there, and moving what is now Article 1 definitions to the end, so that we don't get through the yet-to-be-written awe-inspiring preamble and then get into the definition of administrative agency. So I think we're going to put the definition. So when you look at the red line, really don't pay any attention to the article numbers because they have to be reshuffled anyway. And depending on what comments we get and certainly what actions you take as we go through the code, we may wind up renumbering the articles anyway. Essentially, what I'm going to do is leave it to you if you have questions of me, fine. There are 3 articles beginning right there with Article 2 that raised some questions/comments in my mind. So unless you have some questions or comments, we can just go through the articles one by one, beginning with Article 2. And what I look to the board to do this morning is make peace with these things so that at the end of the morning we can say 8 of them are in shape to put together, and in terms of an immediate time frame during the oversight hearing, we made a promise, if you will, to Councilmember McDuffie that we would have a draft of the comprehensive code to him by the April 30 budget oversight hearing.
Right.
So that's our time frame. What I anticipate is moving through these 8 this morning. They're not controversial, I hope. I would anticipate being able, because there's not so much time between this morning and our next monthly meeting, to come up with 4 or 5 more articles, which would bring it up to 12 or 13, and then with a special meeting of the board between whenever and April 30, we would get through the final article. So that's sort of the time frame. The comfort level that I have in terms of the code itself is pretty high. Again, and I'm going to mention names here, our former Capital City fellow, Mike Beckham, who I sort of expected this morning. It's like a cat, you feed the cat, you can't keep him away. He just loves this thing, but that's fine. Has expressed continuing interest in wanting to help as he can. But the point is, Mike put that 929 draft together, and that in and of itself represented a large body of work.
Right, and it's certainly in very good shape. I would agree with you that I also have a high level of confidence in terms of making that April 30th deadline, because I think it's in looking at these first sets of articles, I think they are largely non-controversial and also in very good shape, and with a terrific analysis in the section by section part as well. So yeah, if we can just walk right through. I have a couple of points here and there and some questions, and we can move along.
Sure. Just in terms of Article 1, the only comment that I had was there in subsection B4. We had carved out a couple of exceptions to the applicability of the code itself, and I just had a question about whether we should loop in lobbyists
And the gift ban.
in the gift ban. Now, Article 18 it basically is the expansive article on lobbyists themselves. So,
I guess I would suggest that we do include it, if for no other reason, to point out the fact that there is at least one other set of restrictions on lobbying activity that are not completely covered in what is now numbered Article 18. So I would include, except as to Article 18 or Article 8 and 18. I would do that. I like the fact that independent agencies are said explicitly in subsection A. I just point that out because we have, over the past 2 years, from time to time, run up against an argument that independent agencies do not fall within our purview. So making that explicit is very helpful.
as did the council. That subsection piggybacks on the council's argument.
Right. I know that we still have to deal with the definitional issues with personal interest.
Yes.
So you have that noted, and I flagged that as well. In subsection, this is just more of a nit, C29, where you talk about covered individuals shall not hold personal interests or financial. I think there's just an S. Personal or financial interests that conflict.
Personal.
Should not hold, covered individuals should not hold personal interests
I see.
or financial
Yes,
interests.
thank you.
No problem. And my only other comment on this article is that I very much support 18, subsection 18 in that same group. Covered individuals shall not aid, abet, counsel, command, induce, or procure a violation, which, again, we've run up against along the way.
18.
18, yeah. And
I had a question question on, before you got to 18, on H, I think it's H. Covered individuals shall satisfy in good faith their lawful obligations, including all just financial obligations to federal, state, district, and local government. Does that also include employees with excessive garnishment?
Well, that's an existing provision. We haven't added that. That's in the current code of conduct through the DPM. We've never really enforced that, though. Well, mostly because no complaints ever come in. We would probably view that as we do the more general standard of an employee shall comply with all federal, state, and local laws. In other words, unless it's somehow connected to your district government work, we would not seek to enforce something like that. So, for instance, if because of your government work, you are entitled to some subsidy, some federal subsidy, and you don't report the entire amount of your salary, we would consider that to be sufficiently connected to take action. But if someone
Like a
owes
Metro Transit subsidy, for example?
or a housing subsidy.
Housing subsidy.
But if someone just owes, a back credit card bill, personal credit card bill, that's probably not something we would seek to take up. But again, we didn't seek to change that from the existing code.
That takes a lot of time for people in payroll and accounting to deal with, at least in the past, for to deal with the garnishment. It increases the workload of actually, payroll folks to deal with all of that. But, if you think it's covered elsewhere, then it's fine.
Okay.
But does this cover the scenario of when we find someone and they don't pay us?
No, I never really thought of it that way.
Make it a separate ethics violation to not pay a fine that we impose?
Yeah, no, I don't think that I would seek to do that.
We made an active effort to get contempt power through the Superior Court, so I think that would be kind of a...
But I'm saying, let's say, for example, the current case that we have where, we won on appeal, and, the response was $20,000. Now, granted, he's not a government employee, but let's assume that he still would be a government employee. Would that fall under this provision? Because that would be just financial obligation.
It's true.
Once you've gone through the whole judicial process.
Yeah, but what would we do? We would fine him again, and then he still wouldn't pay. I think we'd rather use our contempt powers.
Then wouldn't you have the right to fine him, in contempt of this provision? And can you, or let me stop. Because I guess what you would do in this scenario, you don't need this. You just go through the whole process of getting a judgment entered against them and go through, if they're an employee, go through the garnishment process.
That's right. And the thing is that given the language of number 8, if there was some independent reason, let's say we felt super strong about going forward and the Attorney General wouldn't do it and we didn't do it. I mean, the option would still exist. It's just, It wouldn't be not necessarily a practical one, but we would have, under the provision, we certainly can make the argument.
Right, okay. Go ahead, continue with your review.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to pick up on the comment about C-18. It reflects 18 U.S.C. Section 2, which is one of the many federal criminal statutes, ethics-related criminal statutes that expressly apply to district government employees.
Right.
And for the record, the board has now 3 times made the point of needing to reflect the standards in the federal laws that apply to district government employees and elected officials in the comprehensive code. So this little subparagraph is one reflection of that, and I can say generally the draft of the code fairly faithfully references, if not expressly, but certainly sub silentio, the standards in the applicable federal ethics laws. So I think we've made that recommendation, and we're acting on it in the form of the draft comprehensive code. Yep.
Okay. Those are all my thoughts on Article 2. As to contingent fees, I mean, this is really the statute, so I have no comments there.
The only thing that I'll point out is that I'm going to suggest in definitions that we add a definition for contractor, because that is taken out of whatever they call the new and improved PPA. And
Procurement Practices Act.
yeah, the Procurement Practices Act. And there is a definition for contractor in that, so
Okay.
I figured, well, let's just track that just in case anybody. So that'll be reflected in the article on definitions.
Okay. Article 6, the nepotism restrictions. On the text, I think it does a very nice job covering the matters. I want to say that I really appreciated the discussion in the section-by-section analysis that explains why we're including, and for all the right reasons, unpaid positions. And I like the fact that we are generally explaining in the section-by-section analysis where all of our language is coming from, thereby giving both the executive and the legislative branches comfort that we're not, creating a code out of whole cloth here, but that where we have suggested clarifications or changes, therefore very solid reasons and consistent with best practices. And here, we came up against this issue this past year about an unpaid position and whether or not a public official had been advocating or hiring someone to to an unpaid position. And making that clear in the code is important, and having an explanation for it, I think, is equally important. So I think that the language does a nice job both in the text of the article as well as the section-by-section analysis.
Okay, I have a question, though. What was two things. One is the reason for getting rid of personal relationships, which goes to actually my second question, and that is that this provision is not, I'm assuming it's not intended to cover the kind of ethical relationships that we've been seeing recently in the press, such as the one governor who had to resign because of activities of his girlfriend. We're not dealing with basically things such as significant others or people who live in your household and giving preference to them.
That's a good question, and the reason I took it out, my understanding of the draft is that contemplated the recommendations, or at least the discussion in the first two BPRs on cronyism. And each time, the board said, well, we're not going to address it. And I figured this Article 6 is about nepotism, not cronyism, on which...
But Jack, let me stop you there for a second. I'm not certain. I think that we're at a different point now that you have more and more people who are not in traditional relationships, i.e. marriage. And you have more and more people who live together, more and more people who have, quote-unquote, hybrid relationships, but they still are very similar to, being someone's spouse. And so I think that that's actually a different category than just cronyism. When you have people who have long-term relationships that almost like common law marriages that are living together, and the only difference is that they don't have a certificate, a marriage license saying that. Why should their activities that would otherwise bar a spouse not bar them?
Well, this boils down to what the definition of a relative is. And at the end of the day, I think that's where that discussion is going to take place. Because I don't think that you're not suggesting that we would include former business colleagues, and so that you had a former person you work with in another.
No, I'm not.
So if you're suggesting a more intimate, personal / romantic relationship, is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, and I think that is something that we can address. Because the definition of relative is fairly expansive, and to the extent that we need to tinker with that.
Relatives I'm not having an issue with. It's that, like I said, the more intimate relationships, such as the governor. Was that Montana? No, where was that? Wherever it was. The
Washington State.
Girlfriend who was doing all kinds of things that basically required him to resign.
Right. No, understood. And I can say that, and it came up already this morning, when we finally make peace with the definition of personal interest, that'll address that kind of thing, certainly in the conflict of interest context.
Would that have addressed the Jack Evans situation where his girlfriend ends up getting a city contract that if she were his wife, there would have been an issue, but since she's his girlfriend, there was not?
Yeah, I think you're referring to Councilmember Mendelson.
Oh, Mendelson? Was it Mendelson? I'm sorry.
Who pointed.
I got Jack Evans with a girlfriend and he's married. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so
Mendelson.
I mean, and again, there's sort of a different dynamic going there, but I do think that Jack's point about what constitutes a personal interest, and that's going to be one of those thorny questions we'll be walking through in the next discussion, will further define the parameters. But I hear what you're saying about whether the definition of relative needs to be tinkered with to include those intimate relationships. But I think in a different category is a personal interest that may not necessarily fall within the relative category.
Well,
Conflict of interest.
also don't forget, the way we currently enforce this is when there are situations that would ordinarily come under the nepotism statute, but for whatever reason the person doesn't fit, the definition of relative. We can also bring it as a conflict of interest violation because there it doesn't have to be a relative. It can be somebody closely associated with you.
We didn't do that with Mendelson. I mean, we didn't. For some reason, we chose not to do
It was
that.
for a different reason, though. It wasn't because of the relationship, if I recall
It was because there was
correctly.
no financial conflict of interest, and at the moment, the way that the statute reads, it's limited to financial conflict of interest. And this, again, just goes back to the point Jack just made, which is what is a personal interest other than financial interest that some jurisdictions have also made the subject of conflicts of interest rules and regs that we are considering doing, but that'll be in the definition of what a personal interest is for conflict reasons.
Okay, well then I'll take a look at that when we go back to personal interest then.
When looking to clarify relative, I think it would be helpful to look to the definition of person closely affiliated found in our post-employment regulations, because it includes members of your household.
Right. I think that makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. Excellent.
Article 12.
Article 12, use of privileged, confidential, protect information. Hang on one sec. Let me get back to the right page. The language in A1, covered individuals and former covered individuals may not willfully or knowingly disclose or use privileged or confidential information. And it says information protected by the Freedom of Information Act. Should that be information protected from disclosure by the Freedom of Information Act? I mean, because the information protected by FOIA, it can be read as that's the stuff that should be out there on the street, not the stuff that should be held back. It's exempted from FOIA if it's held in. So it's protected from disclosure or exempt from disclosure from FOIA, right? One of the other.
I had a question on that one as well.
Yeah.
I really thought it should be the provision of the statute that is the equivalent of our privacy statute, where it references other statutes that prohibit the disclosure, because FOIA is not a mandatory withholding statute.
Right.
It's all permissive and discretionary. So you wouldn't want employees to be punished for exercising their discretion and releasing information that they are authorized to withhold.
Right.
So there's one specific section of this FOIA statute that references other statutes that prohibit the disclosure of information.
I think that's right. And I've seen that in a bunch of responses on the federal side that I get when I do FOIA stuff.
So would the addition of the two words after protected from disclosure cover your point, Mr. Flower?
Either that, or we would reference the specific section of the Freedom of Information Act that prohibits the disclosure of certain information.
We could do that as well.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because otherwise the employees are simply exercising
Their discretion. Right.
Okay. That's a good point, and I'll confer and get this specific subsection. So with that understanding, the board would be okay to...
Yes.
to
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
And that's it for my comments on that article.
Okay. 13, post-employment.
Post-employment. Okay, so a couple of things here. Subsection E, the last sentence, should it say if the covered individual participated personally and substantially in that matter. It's next to last line in E.
I should get my clean copy out. That's going to make it easier for me to read.
Yeah.
If I could find it. Now let me look over here.
Which subsection are you talking about, Bob?
This is Article 13, subsection E.
Okay, E. Mm-hmm.
E?
E, the end of the section where it says involving a specific party if the individual participated personally and substantially. I'm just asking whether that should say covered individual, since we're using covered individual throughout, or former covered individual.
It should be. Right. Okay. Got it.
Under G, I know that we're going to be talking about this in the definitional discussion. Senior employee will be.
Yes.
We're talking about defining them as people who have to do public financial disclosure statements.
Right.
Right.
And that makes sense.
In the definition, it looks like it says "and confidential." It says it says term senior employee is defined as meaning an individual required to file a public financial disclosure statement, a public financial disclosure certification, or confidential financial disclosure statement pursuant to Article XB.
Well, I guess when we get to the definitional section, we could talk a little bit more about. I know that there's that there is a. We need to have a sort of an idea of who has enough leverage while they are an influence, while they are current sitting government employees, so that when they then leave the government, we should impose a ban on them in terms of or restrictions on what they can do. And the question, public filers, everyone kind of knows who they are out there in the world, right? Because they're all publicly filing.
Yeah.
The confidential filers, they have a different status, right? We put them in a different box, or the council put them in a different box for a reason. The question that we will have to grapple with, we don't have to do it right at this very moment, because this definition, of course, I mean, this will be part of that part of the discussion, is whether or not people who do work, require them to file confidentially but not publicly, have the same kind of power, influence, and potential stuff once they leave the government, so that we should impose the same restrictions on them. And I have no problem with the public filers. The question is whether or not the confidential filers, who the world at large doesn't know that they are filing, generally speaking, so they don't know anything about these people, generally speaking, whether they still fall in the same category. And I think we should think about who they are and what they do on a daily basis before we put them in this more restrictive category.
Let's just be aware, we're all aware of the fact that when the DPM was amended by DCHR, they went way beyond what the federal government requires. Federal government requires that 1 year cooling off period to apply to its senior level employees. The new DPM says it currently applies to everybody.
Right, and and we might as well address that. Well, now this draft eliminates that in its entirety.
Right, and we're going to have to answer the question as to why we're being less restrictive.
Right. I have to tell you, I'm first of all, I wholly support the removal of that provision. I know that we were not consulted when it was put in, and we're kind of surprised. And we've had a number of public meetings where this issue has come up, and we've had to have a discussion about it. So I'm not sticking on any new territory here. Also, as the new administration has taken place, we've had a number of questions about people who wanted to join the administration about what this meant going forward, and trying to answer whether or not they would have what they consider to be a harsh restriction in their post-government service if they were to join the administration now. And I think it's a fair question to ask. The other thing is that there is no other parallel. I mean, we're out on a limb here with this on our own. And
by making it so restrictive.
By making it so restrictive. And it winds up with some very, I believe, unintended consequences about restricting the ability of government employees to go on with their lives in post-government service.
We've talked about this at great length, particularly with the young lady that came in, who started her business, and her whole livelihood was dependent upon it, and basically we couldn't do much to help her. Right,
a line attorney at OAG who was just out there trying to do work, and who was otherwise restricted, not for any reason, any influence has she carried
Right.
other than the fact that she worked for the D.C. government, and that
Exactly.
and we felt
So, I mean, I think it's the right move to make.
right.
But I have to, you guys, I'm going to have to leave for another meeting in about a half an hour.
Yeah, I
so-
think we'll be fine. I think we'll be able to get through the rest of this.
Okay.
I do have, so I think that we're all in agreement on that limit, on removing that from this provision.
Yeah, and I think the answer is, if we get questioned about it, and I can testify to this when it comes up, is that you want to be careful about making it a disincentive to join the district government because we're not going to be able to attract the best and the brightest.
I have trouble imagining that we're going to get any serious pushback from this, to be honest with you. I mean, the explanation in this section by section analysis, I think, is right on point, makes it, at least in the written form, exactly correct. And I have no doubt that if there's any, I haven't heard anything yet, but and this draft is, parts of this have been floating around, I've not had any pushback, at least on my end. I'm having trouble imagining we're going to get much pushback from the administration or the council, to be honest with you. But if we do, we can answer our position and they can stake out their territory. I do have a question about subsection J. This is former council employees.
That's right out of the council's rule.
I realize that, but does this stop them from actually going to their former council member for basic constituent services? Because I sort of read it that way, and I can't imagine that that's what it intended to be.
I don't know the history behind the council provision. Maybe someone in the room can address that?
Well, I have an even more fundamental question. Not all of the employees work for council members. I think that the ban probably should be broader for them. These are senior employees. I mean, such as a general counsel, secretary. There probably are very few, but there are going to be public filers at the council
right.
who do not work for council members.
Right, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, if you happen to live, many of them, most of them, I don't know, live in the District of Columbia, and you want to go to your council member or another council member and ask for a basic constituent service, that we have been around this tree many, many times.
I can also say there would be a history to a historical interpretation of this provision and application to the council. I mean, to council employees, even over and above what the rule would say, they're going to be
is your
interpretations.
feeling, Mr. Flowers, that the subsection needs to be written or eliminated?
Probably, certainly reviewed.
Okay. Well, let me suggest, because this is obviously it's come up several times this morning, to the extent that there are questions like this, maybe the staff can work on making some revisions, then circulate it to the board.
That makes sense.
And rather than take up time now, especially because Ms. Lathan's time's limited.
Right. And I do think that this is one in particular where we should go to the general counsel, to the council, and say, hey, this is your language. We're about to do something with it. Where do you think it needs to go? In which direction? Because again, on the one hand, I agree with Mr. Flowers that there's no reason why it should be limited to your particular council member, especially if you're not working for any one. But on the other hand, I'm personally not looking to restrict, someone who lives in Ward 7 from going to Councilmember Alexander and saying, hey, in a post-employment status, I live here, this is what's going on in my neighborhood, so I want to weigh in on this. So I'm not looking to do that either.
Right. No, understood. And let me say, and this is no secret, because I know we've shared it with any number of people with whom we've discussed the draft. We're generally not looking to reinvent the wheel here.
Exactly.
We want to increase people's comfort level with this thing. And to the extent that we could go back to the council, for example, and say, look, this is a cut and paste out of your code. We're hoping that, but sometimes, and this may well be one of them, we need to massage it.
Right. All right, so if you wouldn't mind,
No,
Mr. Grimaldi, Mr. Flowers, working together and getting some, maybe some input from the council as well, that'd be great. Okay, that's it for that article for me. Ms. Lathan, anything else in that article?
Not from me.
I only have one question about Article 16, limitations on honorary and royalties. I realize this is coming out of the code as well, but for Section C, so it's not counted if it's paid to a charitable organization. But supposing it's your charitable organization. I mean, supposing you establish your own, right? Supposing Carl Racine establishes his own charitable organization, can he go out and get $1 million and dump it in there?
I agree. We should revise that.
Revise. Okay.
Well, gosh, I don't know because
And what? Yeah, I mean,
I do know. Let me just give you an example. I do know of a relatively high-level federal employee who received honorariums and donated them to charities, and then he had difficulty with the federal ethics folks because they said that he was basically just getting a tax deduction, essentially, and that the purpose was. I mean, that I don't think it makes any sense, but that he was taking because he took it obviously as a charitable deduction, but he didn't claim it as income. And maybe that has nothing to do with this, but
yeah, it's probably more of a tax matter than it is an ethics matter.
Yeah, maybe that's a tax matter.
My only
I
concern.
wouldn't have any trouble with someone giving an honorarium and donating it all to charity.
No, I don't. I just want the thing is you don't want it to be a cover, and I'm not. And I apologize for using Carl Racine's name. I'm not suggesting he would do this, but there are many folks out there who establish their own charitable organizations.
Yeah, and they established their 501c3s.
Yeah, well, or a C4 or a C something.
That could present a problem.
Right, because you could have a not just a C3, but you could have a C4. You have a political action, whatever it is.
Yeah, political action committee.
Whatever they are. Again, I'm no expert in any of this, but all I know is that people set up their own charitable organizations and foundations in their own name or for their own personal purposes or private interests.
Yeah.
That would be my concern.
Okay, so maybe we could work on some language.
Some language,
to
just
suggest that.
right,
Okay.
limiting that.
Good catch.
Article 17, ethics training, ethics counseling. You raised the question, Mr. Grimaldi, about to whom will they report in the manner and the date. May I suggest that we not enshrine any of that in the article, but rather create the opportunity here for the board to establish rules and rulemaking to make that happen, so that it can be modified as necessary on a much less restrictive basis. And I have to tell you, my preference would be that they all get reported to the agency director, and that the agency director then has to tell us who didn't submit them. But the matter, the date, and all that stuff, I would prefer not to enshrine in Article 17.
Good point. We do need to fill in that blank, though.
The number of hours.
Yeah, right.
Right. I agree there. I mean, what is your recommendation, Mr. Sobin?
Our ethics trainings are 2 hours long.
Right.
So some either going to be 2 hours or 4 hours, some multiple of two. So you don't run into the same problem some OAG attorneys have when they're trying to complete 13 hours.
Yeah. So are you suggesting 4 on a biannual basis or 2 on a biannual basis?
I think it makes sense to have at least one ethics training a year with 2 hour ethics training.
Okay.
It shouldn't. Yes, Jack.
So a total of 4
4 hours.
4 hours on a biannual basis.
Okay.
Ms. Lathan, you okay with that?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me just check. Hang on one sec. My section here. And then as to, I have no comments on the additional standard side. I realize that the process is not used often, but perhaps once it's enshrined in an article. And again, I'm not looking to have 1 million different agencies with 1 million different sets of standards. That being said, is that there are some agencies that might benefit from a more rigorous view of things. We talk about the contracting world, for example, that we have limited authority in that realm, but they can impose tighter restrictions than we can.
As well as the Judicial Code of Conduct for Administrative Law Judges.
OAJ, exactly, which I think is an excellent example.
Can I go back to Article, the ethics training, ethics counseling article?
Yes, ma'am.
Just briefly, this is an issue we run into with the DPM where part of it, especially when it speaks to Form 36, it doesn't say exactly who is supposed to create Form 36, and we've been having issues about that with DCHR currently, and about who's supposed to create it, who's supposed to administer it, who's supposed to, all of those things. And so I see the point that you're saying where you don't want to set down, enshrine exactly who's going to certify, who's doing ethics training and things like that, but I almost think just because of all of the issues we've had with just this one section of the DPM right now. I'm concerned that if we don't enshrine something in the CCC about who has to certify it and how it has to be certified, that we're going to have the same problem that we are running into now with Form 36, where it doesn't exist yet, and DCHR is just.
But if we make it clear that if we put in here and council grants us the authority to create rules to enforce this provision, then doesn't that solve the problem? Because then we can publish the rules. They can comment on it. Everyone can weigh in, and then they can get published. And then if council doesn't like what we do, they can undo us.
Yeah, I agree with you that in optimistic world, yes, because DCHR also has that ability,
But the difference is that we can control the rules on our end, and they control the rules on their end. And if we are given, if the board is given the ability to create the rules for this particular section, even if it impacts, obviously, the agency director shall turn in. Employees shall report to the directors. The director shall report by X date. Then at least we have. I think the thing that you're struggling with the DCHR side is you can't force them to make their rules. So.
Okay.
Move on.
All right.
I think that's it.
And I think that's it.
With the exception of maybe 2 or 3 sections that we're going to attempt to revise,
We're in good shape.
I think
Yeah.
we've got 8 down, 11 to go,
Terrific.
and I hope at least one person in this room sleeps better tonight.
Yeah.
For any number of reasons.
Well, thank you, Mr. Grimaldi. This is and in his absence from the room, Mr. Beckham, and everyone else who weighed in on this. It's a really, really good draft. I think we have some very minor tinkering with this, but other than that, certainly these 8 articles are good to go. And we managed to, nail down a few policy issues, and we'll do a few more in the next meeting. All right. Well, Deborah, we've got 13 minutes left before 10:30. Do you want to try to do the closed portion real quick?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So at this point, I'll go ahead and entertain a motion to close the meeting to take up a number of confidential matter. I don't have my code site in front of me. Thank you very much. Hang on one sec.
You got it?
I got it. Of course, I can't see it, but I have it. To discuss ongoing confidential investigations pursuant to DC Code 2-575B, to deliberate on a decision in which the board will exercise quasi-judicial functions pursuant to DC Code 2-575B13, and personal matters pursuant to Code 2-575B10. And I will note for the record, although we always offer the public an opportunity to speak before we go to closed session, there are no members of the public present in the room at the moment other than those associated with the board. So we'll go ahead and close the meeting at this point. The time is 11:19. I said before 10, but it's really 11. Spring forward. Okay, we're back on the public record. It is 11:29, and we actually have lost Ms. Lathan on the phone, so we don't have our quorum. But as a practical matter, we're done and have nothing publicly to report anyway. So we are adjourned until the April meeting. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Chairman.